We do all kinds of things here at Word in Your Ear.
We do podcasts.
We do video casts.
Quizzes.
Crowdcasts with famous authors.
And we can guarantee to make your next birthday one you will never forget.
There's only one way to make sure you get all of this, you get it in full, and you get it first.
And that's by becoming a supporter on Patreon.
Details here.
Word in Your Attic. A Zoom with a view.
Welcome to another Word in Your Attic, where the powerful allure of old vinyl never dims. So you can't imagine a more kindred spirit than the founder of Classic Album Sundays, the great Colleen Murphy. Colleen, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
Thanks for joining us. And I love the way that you and Dave have got the same wallpaper. I've ordered mine, but someone hasn't turned it up yet. It looks like the real thing, doesn't it? It's fantastic.
Took years to produce.
Yeah. And you're in London, I'm thinking. That's your studio in your house, isn't it?
Yes, this is the record library / DJ studio / radio station / TV studio / yoga studio.
Right. Because there's room for yoga in there too.
There is. When I clear all this up, I can get a little mat in here.
So a
lot of yoga over lockdown, I can tell you that.
So give us a history of this. How long have you been there, and how long have you had that kind of setup? What kind of setup is it?
Nice. Okay, well, basically, we moved into this house 3 weeks after our daughter was born. So that was just 16 and a half years ago.
Oh, right. Okay, so
yeah, we've been here for a while. And as soon as we moved in, because I had a newborn baby, my father came over and he said, the first thing you need to do is just to get some regular shelves up. I'll just do some quick shelves. He was very handy and, a lot of carpentry and stuff. But he said, these are going to be cheap shelves. This is the last room you need to do over. Just get the shelves up, get the records on the wall, just get it out of the way. So I did that. And then we sat here for years. It was a terrible carpet, all my equipment in here. I mean, just so much stuff. I was even making an album at one point. It was just crazy. And 2 years ago, luckily, we finally had the money and the time and the wherewithal to actually design it. We ripped everything out and made custom-made shelving. I mean, you can see there's even shelving for the 7 inches. On the top, there's CD.
Look at that.
CDs. So you're gonna have to look at the CDs because I never buy CDs, but there's all those promos that I've had for decades of being in the business, and a console, a custom made DJ console, and there's even stuff underneath. There's even storage underneath for records to wait.
Dave, are you absolutely sick with envy?
I'm sick
with
envy. If I
had a room like that, I would literally. I don't know how you'd ever get me out of it. I would just be so happy sitting in there all day, noodling about, doing little bits of recording.
It's so nice, and it's all in birch ply, so it's a really lovely feel in here, and it's just exactly what we wanted. And I'm telling you, we are so fortunate to have done this summer before lockdown, because it would have been a tip in here, and I don't think I would have been able to do all the stuff I've been able to do.
Right.
So things have been carrying on pretty much as normal, haven't they, for you? I mean, I guess you're. Have you been really affected by it?
Of course, in the beginning I was. So in March, I had I have a few careers. One is DJing as well, and the other one's Classic Album Sundays. Right, it's also radio.
DJing obviously affected. Yeah.
DJ. So in March, I had a residency every Saturday. I got the first Saturday done, which was great. And it was a huge success. And then all of the rest canceled. All of my festivals canceled. All of my foreseeable gigs. And then same with Classic Album Sundays. And at first I thought I'd have to shut shop. I was pretty prepared to do it. And then the furlough scheme was announced. So, and then I just, I'm used to working hard, and I have a pretty strong New England work ethic. And I just got busier, and I started broadcasting all my radio shows live. I made a Patreon subscription service for Classic Album Sundays, took all the events online. I did loads of other kind of ticketed events online. We got some content commissions with Classic Album Sundays as well. And actually then we also got the Arts Council England Cultural Recovery Grant in October, and we were able to pay 22 different freelancers and create a whole series of programs called My Classic Album and pay the musicians as well. A lot of up and coming musicians, as well as some famous ones. So we've been really, really busy. And then I was doing like live DJ house parties. I mean, that was for free, but I was just, doing like a Saturday night 5-hour set with visuals, on Mixcloud Live. So I actually ended up getting busier.
Absolutely. No, that's
making
great.
Less.
Well, look, we should get on to the story of how you evolved Classic Album Sundays in a minute. But why don't we go back to, as is traditional on this show, go back to your very early days and your first memories of music, and indeed your memories of what was playing on your parents' record player when you were a kid. This is was it Massachusetts? Where were you born?
It was in Massachusetts, yeah.
So what kind of things would they be playing?
My parents weren't as adventurous musically. My father had a really great singing voice, and he actually loved music. He got an organ and then a piano, which I played. So he was really trying to foster, he really wanted me to play an instrument because he never had the chance. And I used to sing as well. I used to be a first soprano, believe it or not.
Good,
wow.
Yeah, he's kind of crazy. And it was
singing what? Singing classical music?
It was choral music.
Choral music, yeah.
Yeah, and I did sing. I mean, we weren't that religious. I was raised loosely Lutheran, but I did sing, and I played organ in church actually a few times too. I was a pretty good sight reader, yeah. But they had more traditional sense. My father was never adventurous in terms of rock music. He really didn't like it. He was raised by a British war bride, so he knew all the British Vera Lynn and all that. I used to hear that at my grandmother's house. But he was more into like the 60s kind of pop, and we used to take Sunday drives, and we'd have Artie Woo Ginsburg playing. And so I know
I know that name. I know
that name. I mean, he's Wolfman Jack, of course, because they had syndicated shows on Sundays.
Oh, brilliant.
So that's kind of where that was a huge influence on me, 1960s music. And I had my uncle, I grew up in a big kind of Irish Catholic family. We were Lutheran, but most of the family was Irish Catholic. So it was a big family, a big family of Murphys in a very small town. And my dad was the eldest of 6. So his siblings some of them were closer in age to me. And they were teenagers or early 20s. So my uncle lived a few doors down, and that's the record collection I rated the most.
Right.
And then I babysat for another uncle's son. So I rated their record collection. And then my aunt had a pretty decent
listening to what? And what sort of stuff was that?
It was all different. So my uncle listened to a lot of classic rock. I mean, at that time it was just called rock because it was the 70s and it was just rock music. So Springsteen, I was really into Crosby, Stills and Nash, Fleetwood Mac. And in fact, the record that kind of was my first favorite album, which I never returned.
It's still from a library, or is it
confession time now?
It's got your best friend's name on it.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
we haven't had that yet.
This is the first one.
Past.
Yeah.
Lord, yes.
On the DRAM label.
On the DRAM. In fact, it's all falling apart because I should put it into some plastic. I just noticed this yesterday. My uncle's his initials are still on there. DWM, Dennis Walter Murphy. So
now is that
Dennis, if you're watching, you can get it back anytime.
Yeah, the thing with this, I think it made me fall in love with albums because my father gave me a hand-me-down GE Trimline record deck, which was probably from the 60s. I probably got it in 1979, 1980. And, had the 2 speakers that came out, the turntable that folded down. So I needed some records. So I borrowed a bunch of records like the White Album, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, the Stones Got Live If You Want It, and this one. And I never returned this one. It really made me fall in love with the album format. And it's kind of it's kind of an uncool
it's a really curious thing, that is, because somebody was discussing that the other day on social media. The DRAM label was Decca's kind of schmaltzy, living room kind of stereo test label. And then the Moody Blues just ended up on it completely by accident, and they were the salvation of DRAM. and of course that's got Nights in White Satin on it.
That's
hasn't it?
that's why I loved that song. Whenever I heard it on the radio, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that song! It just really affected me. It would really moved me." And but I actually love the entire album because it's a concept album.
It
And there's
is.
other
It
songs
starts
on
with
here.
Dawn, doesn't it, or something like that?
Oh, Dawn is oh my God, I'm starting to get teary-eyed just thinking about it. Dawn is a feeling, Peak Hours, so much fun. But Twilight Time has a real charm to it. But this album, I know inside and out. And I think it was the first album where I said, oh my gosh, the album is a statement. It's not just, it's not just singles. So that was a massive influence. And I also listened to a lot of Doors. I was really into the Doors. No One Gets Out of Here Alive, I think, was the first rock book that I read.
All right.
Obsessed with Jim Morrison, as you can imagine, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl would be.
Were there any posters on your bedroom wall?
I had so many posters. Okay, basically, I started in music quite early. So I had a radio show from the age of 14. We were lucky because
amazing.
we had a 10-watt radio station in my high school. And high school is 4 years. So one of my uncles had helped start it, like about.
What was your show called?
The first show, I didn't have a name, but it was mainly the oldies kind of stuff, and the Doors and Crosby, Stills and Nash and that kind of thing. The next show I had just been turned on to kind of new wave and post-punk by a guy in the drama club. I was in the drama club, and I was sitting there with him one day, and he puts the Walkman headphones on my head. Listen to this, and it was this album, Lena Lovitch.
Oh my God! And what
No
cover?
Man's Land.
Is this the American cover? That is.
It must be, and it's 1982, so that would have been the year. So it must have been an album that had just come out.
Was she on Stiff? I can't remember.
She was on Stiff in the UK.
Yeah,
it's in the UK. Yeah, it's Stiff.
Oh, right,
Stiff and Epic in the US. And this kind of transformed my life because it just opened the door to a whole other kind of music that I hadn't been exposed to. I mean, I knew Casey Kasem's top 40 inside and out. I knew all the oldies stuff. I knew rock, really well. I listened to loads of radio. I got my first radio when I was 7. It was a transistor radio. And I remember running upstairs, putting it on, and I was just obsessed, absolutely obsessed with the radio. I would sleep with it on, and there's all these luckily growing up outside of Boston, there was so much great radio. We had some of the more liberal minded commercial radio in the country. So we had WBCN, which was favorite radio station. And then we also had Kiss 108, which was more of like the dance music, but the stuff that really crossed over, a lot of funk, electro, freestyle, which as you can imagine in the 80s. We had we had great hard rock stations, WAAF, and at the time COZ in the 70s, WCOZ, which also had the Dr. Demento show on a Sunday night, which was a lot of fun. But we also had lots of college radio. Growing up outside of Boston, I mean, Boston still may have the highest density, the highest population of colleges and universities in one city. And I was so fortunate to grow up with a lot of college radio around me. And
what was the appeal of Lena Lovitch?
Because it was so different, because I had never heard music like this before. I was only exposed. So you have, first of all, I mean, maybe I can't remember thinking this, but I don't know if it had anything to do with her gender. I don't know. I can't remember. But I loved the electronics on it and the keyboards, and just hearing something that I thought was great music that I had never heard before. And I thought, there's got to be so much music out there that I've never heard that's amazing that I'm completely missing out on. And so I started listening to a show called Nocturnal Emissions on WBCN on Sunday nights by Oedipus.
Snappy title.
He ended up being the program director of BCN. But it's the first time I heard like Babies on Fire by Brian Eno. And, I started hearing a lot of edgier kind of music, Joy Division, and also pop music in the early 80s. I mean, I was a teenager during the second British invasion. So loads of Trevor Horn stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and it popped out of the radio, whether it was Frankie Goes to Hollywood or ABC or Yes. I mean, it just popped. And, but I also became a fan of. I had a big Joy Division poster over my bed for a while. That later, then I got a Prince one.
God,
David
that's
Bowie.
a cheery thought every
Yes,
morning. Isn't
wake
it?
up
You
every
open
morning.
it,
I was like, okay,
you open the
it wasn't
curtains
black
and
and
then,
white. It was in black
and
and
there's
white.
Peter Hook staring at you.
Staring over a chain link fence, and I was like, "That's what Manchester is like, black and white." And I was right.
And it
I mean, I
is.
was- exactly.
Yeah, it is.
But I was obsessed. With Joy Division, New Order, also bands like Zymox. I had lots of 4AD bands, of course, Cocteau Twins.
Yeah.
David Bowie was my big love. And
Did you read about any of that stuff?
I
So,
did.
did
It
you
was
catch
hard.
imported copies of the NME or
Yes,
things like
I
that?
did. I worked in a couple of record shops. So my first record shop that I worked at when I was 16, it was called Strawberries, and that was more of a mainstream chain that was owned by Morris Levy, one of my
Where
first
was that?
bosses.
Oh, right.
The Hitman.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I actually got to meet him because I was working in the
Yes.
second largest store in Framingham, Massachusetts, and the main office was just down the road. And one summer, I actually worked in the advertising department there, and Morris was my boss. It was
Wow.
That's
pretty crazy.
fantastic.
Pretty crazy. Yeah.
This is the man who allegedly wrote all kinds of rock and roll favorites, isn't
Oh
he?
yeah, he wrote all of them. Absolutely, yeah. What a great writer. But we went to
What was your
we went to
experience of-
Sunnyview Farm. Actually, he would ship all of us riffraff up there on buses for the 4th of July for a barbecue. Weren't allowed in the house, of course.
Of course.
You can imagine the guys that
Yeah.
were picking stock in the warehouse. I mean, they were over. I mean, we're all on the bus
Yeah,
going
yeah.
up to upstate New York to Sunnyview Farm and getting really pissed, basically.
I have to know more about you on your school radio station.
Okay, there's a lot
So you're
to
telling
say
me
about that.
you presented programs when you're like 14 or something like that.
Yeah,
Is that?
every year.
So
for
did
4
you-
years.
did you- So you never did. Presumably, you never did that thing at home that loads of kind of would-be DJs do. That they kind of play at home and they record themselves at home, whisper.
Mixtapes
Okay,
from
but
high
with
school.
your, but
Oh.
with your, okay,
got them
with
here.
you, with your chat, with your links there. I mean, how did you feel when you were 14? You first opened a fader and had to go,
Okay.
"Welcome to so whatever."
Basically the studio, the radio studio, WHHB, 10 watts, 91.5 FM. It was a little room, not much bigger than this room, off the side of the library. And one of my cousins had a radio
Next to
show.
the
She invited
library.
me up.
Yeah.
And she said, "Okay, we're putting on live mic." And I ran into the library. I did
Just
not
keep the
want
volume
the
down.
microphone at
Yes.
all. Yeah, I just ran. I was like, ah.
Yeah.
But then I got kind of used to it, and I wouldn't say I was very talkative. I found this. This was from I have a bunch of stuff to show you.
Right,
actually, but
go on.
Basically,
Go on.
the second radio show I did in my sophomore years with a guy named Andy Gentilomo, and he was hugely into all the stiff record stuff, Elvis Costello, The Damned, Dead Kennedys, Crass. So I was playing a lot of that stuff. My third year was really interesting because I had a friend, my friend Mary Caruso. She was really into funk and electro and early hip hop. So this is 1983, I think,
Yeah.
about 1983. And I was into punk, and I was also into funk as well, and hip hop and electro and freestyle. So we had a show called Punk, Funk and Junk.
Oh, brilliant. That's good.
We made sweatshirts, and that's
Yeah.
how I got the name Cosmo, because there was a band named Nucleus, an electro band, and the DJ's name was Cosmo. And I had Cosmo on the back of my sweatshirt. I really wish I still had it. She had Remix. Her name was Remix. So it was Remix and Cosmo doing Punk, Funk, and Junk. And
Oh, that's lovely.
That was my junior year. My senior year, I had two morning radio shows, Monday and Friday. And I even have the poster.
Oh, what?
Let's see.
So this is what I
Strawberry
did.
alarm clock.
Oh, that's
my alarm clock,
lovely.
because I was also into 60s. There was a whole kind of Paisley kind of.
Yeah.
So you started at 7:30 in the morning, or did you go
6 to 7. 6 to 7.
You started at 6?
Playing what at 6 o'clock in the morning?
Well, here we got Nina Hagen, this Dead Kennedys.
Oh my God!
Let-
Let people out of
oh
bed.
my
Dead
God.
Kennedys at 6 in the morning.
Let's
Lovely.
get this straight. You were what, 16 years old or something
16,
like that?
17 for the last
17 years
year.
old, and so you
Yeah.
were getting up in time to
Yeah.
go to school to be on the air at 6 in the morning.
And I worked about 20 to 25 hours a week in the record shop. And during Christmas season, the shop closed at 11. So I worked a lot, but I was obsessed. I was completely obsessed. But Strawberry Alarm Clock was also a play on the record shop that I worked at. I also loved the whole 60s pop paisley psychedelics. There's a whole movement of that again in the 80s. So it's getting into the Electric Prunes and Chocolate Watch Band and stuff like that. But there was also like newer bands like the 3 O'Clock and the Liars were from Boston. Boston had a really big scene of garage rock. Also Plastic Lands, the Enigma label had quite a lot of stuff on it. So yeah, I mean, I was a complete obsessive, and then I was going to loads of shows.
So you were doing any schoolwork in between this?
I don't mean to brag, but I did really well.
I bet you did.
I did.
I bet you did.
I didn't mean to. I came from a family that no one had gone to university after school. I mean, I came. It was like working class, and then it was middle class of people doing trade kind of jobs. And I come from a family of builders, carpenters, and my dad had his own estate agency, but he was also a boat captain and a carpenter, and he was a mechanic when I was born, actually. So these are the kinds of jobs, but I did so well in school. I mean, my idea was actually I'm going to move to the UK, and my grandmother was English. She was a war bride, and my father had lived here for a short time, and my grandfather was in the Korean War. So there was some family here, and England always seemed so exotic. And plus I was listening to all the music. I was quite obsessed with it, reading Melody Maker and thinking, gosh, the stuff that I love is much more mainstream over there than it is over here. But I did really well in school. Kind of surprised.
So you went to college in New York, didn't you?
Yeah. I applied to all different universities, all based on kind of radio station they had. And I got accepted to BU, where I actually got more financial aid and more scholarships. But I had kind of explored Boston so much. It was such a small city, and I knew all the record shops. I'd been all to the clubs. I had a fake ID because I had hung out with a lot older people from the record shop. So luckily I had a fake ID. So I was going to all the shows. And I moved to New York, and I got into NYU. And the first week I went up to WNYU, which at the time was one of the most significant college radio stations in the country for a few reasons. One, the reach was incredible. We had our transmitter was in the Bronx, and we had the tri-state area, covered.
Really?
Yeah.
But the other reason is we're in the middle of Manhattan. We're downtown Greenwich Village on Broadway, 741 Broadway. And all the bands that were coming through would come up to our radio station.
Who did you interview? Can you remember?
Set. Yeah.
Do you remember anybody significant you talked to?
I interviewed quite a few people, but there's some of my favorite bands were interviewed by other people, to be honest. So you would see Nick Cave coming through. I mean, I ended up interviewing all of them afterwards for a syndicated radio show I was producing when I was 21, 22. But it was also interesting people like performance artists like John Sex and like people that worked with Andy Warhol. I had some kind of interesting radio shows.
Yeah.
One of them was a show that I had taken over the Mod Monday show because I was into the whole kind of Paisley scene and also into soul music. But I was really getting into the more, let's say at the age of 18, I went down the rabbit hole. That's all I need to say. I was Alice.
Right.
Fair enough.
And
drink me. Yes.
Exactly. And so I started to get into the longer form prog stuff as well, which, loving the Moody Blues, of course, paved the way. And growing up in the 70s, of course, you're going to be a Pink Floyd fan. And also Rush was a big influence too when I was growing up, because we weren't far from Canada. So Rush was Rush and Led Zeppelin were the biggest bands in my high school. Definitely.
Right.
For everybody, that you just knew all their albums.
Yeah.
And you knew every Led Zeppelin album, or you couldn't graduate. Actually, you weren't allowed to graduate if you didn't know Led Zeppelin 1 through 4. But basically, back to WNYU. I've kind of lost my train of thought.
No, well, you were, didn't you go to?
Yeah, Plastic Tales from the Marshmallow Dimension is the show that I started. And
Plastic Tales from the Marshmallow Dimension.
Plastic Tales. I'm writing this down. Plastic Tales from the Marshmallow.
Yeah, and
Dimension.
Marshmellow spent MELLOW.
Of course it is.
Of course it is. And I have to say, when I found out that John Peel had a show called The Perfume Garden, I did breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Knowing that that I wasn't that pretentious, but it was a really fun show. And it was, I played a lot of
That's wonderful.
Psychedelic rock.
We're all sitting on spotted toadstools now with, smoking hookah pipes with giant caterpillars.
Exactly. And I was going to see the Grateful Dead at this point.
I
went to my first Dead show, and
so this is when you're in New York, right?
So tell me this: when you go on the radio in New York and you're broadcasting quite a wide area and so forth, is having a Boston accent, is that a good thing or not?
I lost it. I didn't have a huge Boston accent, but I listened to I found one tape of Strawberry Alarm Clock, and I heard myself say WHHB, just in a Boston-y kind of accent. But I lost that when I got to New York.
All right. Okay.
I think also being on the radio, I had a really good radio mentor he's like my big brother, basically. And he had been in the Army. He had a scholarship to NYU. He was a grad student, and he was a program director when I first started. And he had worked in commercial radio and on the Army radio as well. And he had an amazing voice, and he just taught me a lot about radio and how to present. And I also took over as program director after he finished, and I was the first female program director actually there. But I also worked in commercial radio a bit too. At the end of 1989, I lived in Japan as a radio DJ.
You moved to Japan?
That's astonishing.
It was interesting because basically I was up.
So they offered you a job and you went?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't even offered to me. It was only offered to men, and I went to the audition and I got it. Basically it was 1989, and we get a call at the radio station at WNYU. I happened to be there. They said we would need some male presenters to audition for a temporary radio station we're putting together in Nagoya, Japan, run by the CBC, which is the Chubu Broadcasting Corporation. It's going to be a temporary radio station up for 6 months. We want 2 shifts of people. And I said to the other female presenters who I knew, I said, we're auditioning too. We're doing it. So many of us went and auditioned, and the woman said to me, it was a female, a Japanese woman who I expect at the time, a lot of Japanese women were moving over to New York, doing trend forecasting and a lot of they spoke English. Yeah. I expect because they were experiencing sexism at home as well. Not that we weren't, we totally were as well, but I think it was much more intense there at that time. So she said to me, I'm going to make sure you get this. And I became the lead DJ. I was flown over, for a week when I was 20 to do all the press, like Rolling Stone in Japan. And
wonderful.
I became like a local celebrity. And then I was there for 3.
So were you doing your own show, your own music?
I was on air.
So was it Plastic Tales from the Marshmellow Dimension?
But it was really
transported to Tokyo.
It was really interesting. It was actually in Nagoya, but it was, I had playlists, but the playlists, I was on air 40 hours a week. On air 40 hours. So working 60. Normal Japanese life. Still do it.
Yeah.
But presumably not speaking any Japanese.
No, but I did learn some. But I was playing stuff like Brian Eno. Like I had the chance to play my own stuff. Elrichi Sakamoto, of course, because I was a big fan. And Haruo Misono and Yellow Magic Orchestra. The thing that was interesting about it being a World Design Exposition is we were also playing Chinese pop, music from Pakistan, all sorts of music, city pop, of course, from Japan. So Japanese pop as well. Stuff like, Soul to Soul was just breaking out. So stuff like that. Also like things that I love, like Elvis Costello and all sorts of music, but pop music as well. It was a total mishmash, but it was trying to please a global audience. So it was really interesting to play that stuff. And it was just a I had never. It was like the third time I think I've been on a plane.
Yeah.
I think it's
That's
the second
amazing.
time I had left
Yeah.
the United States. You know,
Yeah.
it was 20. We didn't travel. We didn't go abroad as a child, and I think I went on a plane once to Disney World when I was 16.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and then once to come over here for a school trip, and that was it. I had never been outside the United States.
So you came here for a school trip. Tell us about that. Go on.
Well, yeah, basically, since I worked in the record shop, and I also was taking French, and which I loved, and I saved some money, and the French club offered us a trip that we had to pay for ourselves. I think it was $800 to come to London and Paris, I think for just about 10 days. So I saved my money and I did it. And I was so excited because all the music that I loved was coming out of the UK. And I also got to see some family who I never met. And I had my first curry and I had my first pint.
Jackpot.
I never had any because
the world is your
lemons in a
oyster.
row.
So you come to London. When you get your first free time in London, I want to know, where do you go?
Well,
And what year are we talking about
this
here?
was 1984,
Okay.
85, maybe
Right.
1985 actually. And since it was a school trip, I was supposed to be doing all the tourist things
sure,
staying at the hotel, which I did do. But luckily, my dad's cousin and his wife came and rescued me for one night. And they took me to a pub because you could drink when you're at 16. So I had a pint. And they took me out for a curry. I had never had Indian food before. And it was probably near Hampstead because they lived in that neighborhood. So yeah, it was.
What a sensory overload.
It was
That's
incredible.
amazing.
And then I remember
It
seeing
is.
Strawberry Switchblade in the airport. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Oh, you saw them. Good grief.
I saw them walking through. I was like, whoa,
In their amazing
playing the
polka
radio.
dots, their giant polka dot ribbons and bows.
Yes, you
yeah.
couldn't miss them. And I also listened to the radio because, in the hotel is probably some cheap hotel, but you have the, Radio 1, 2, 3, little buttons.
Yeah.
And Radio 1, I was just so impressed with Radio 1, all the music that was being played. And it was quite incredible, but I remember buying some great leather boots with buckles all over them as well.
Cool.
And then there's
Yes.
a family movie of me talking about, these are my London boots. Look at my
Well,
London
that's
boots.
very mid-80s. That's
Did
like
you?
Pixie
Mid-80s.
boots.
Did you go down Carnaby Street?
I did, yeah.
Yeah,
we
you
had
see,
to.
you would have
See,
done.
Dave and I worked in
Had to.
Carnaby Street on Smash Hits magazine.
Really?
And yeah, this was that's where it was based, in Smash Hits in Carnaby Street. And in 1982, 1983, 94, you still had, particularly American tourists, walking down the street expecting to see genuinely a member of the Rolling Stones, a member of the Beatles, a member of. Well, am I right, Dave? I mean, they thought that swinging London was going to be carrying on.
We used to think, why does this still go on? Why do young people from all over the world who weren't even born when the kind of Carnaby Street thing was going on, why do they all, beat a path here and buy rubber policemen's helmets as souvenirs?
Yeah.
I didn't do that. I bought boots.
Well, there you go.
Union Jack waistcoat.
with
And at that time, you
chains.
could buy kind of new romantic pixie boots and scarves and throws and blouses.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
So
it was a whole
funny.
new romantic scene, wasn't it? Of course.
Yeah, it was all that was all being sold in, and all the punk stuff was sold in Carnaby Street.
Yeah,
really.
it was all there.
Terrible versions of it.
Probably where I got my boots. I can't
Leopard
remember where
skin
I got
it
them.
will
That's
be.
probably
Things like
where I
that.
got them.
Either that or Camden Lock.
That's so funny.
Or Camden Lock, yeah.
One of the two.
Which I still like. I still like Camden Lock, I have to say. I
So
still
can
think
I
there's
ask
a
you
certain
about
charm.
the just go back to New York for a second? Didn't you go to the various loft parties?
That happened later. So that
Oh,
was
it's later.
90s.
Okay.
We
Oh,
haven't
no,
even
so
gotten
let's
to the
not jump to
90s
it then.
yet. We're still in the 80s.
Oh, sorry, I thought that was
right,
yeah. No, go on.
Well, basically, after I graduated from NYU, I went to San Francisco and then I went backpacking. And when I was down in Guatemala City at this Pension Mesa, where all the gringos stayed, I bumped into an old program director, the program director two before me, John Fox. And he said he had started a syndicated radio show called Music View that he had started at WNYU, with doing all these interviews with bands and then editing it into a half an hour show and then syndicating that to over 200 college radio stations across the country. And he had a job opening. And I was in Guatemala City. He's like, Colleen, why don't you come? Are you coming back to New York? I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I got to go back to Massachusetts for Christmas. He said, well, come and audition. So I went in December and auditioned. So that was 1990, December 1990. I had already graduated from university and done some traveling. And I got the job. And that was really interesting because that's where I interviewed basically everybody. I mean, from Britpop to shoegazer to all the American bands, like the Butthole Surfers was one of my favorite bands. Locust Abortion Technician was a massively transformative album for me, and seeing their shows, I went to like 13 of their shows, I think in 3 years or something. Flaming Lips, all that kind of psychedelic stuff as well, but Meat Puppets, all the 4AD bands, I mean, loads of stuff, even the early rave acts from the UK as well, like the Shaman.
So you were doing everybody.
Oh yeah, it's
There it was like, who open the door opens, in comes another band.
Nirvana, the week that Nevermind came out as well.
So what did you find from that experience are the questions that never fail?
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting one because my first interview was the shittiest and the worst.
With who?
It was with Andrew Eldritch.
All right.
Well,
okay.
And I had been a
doing what it
Sisters
says
of
on the
Mercy
tin.
fan, and all that. It was, but yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. But looking back, I bet my questions weren't very good either. I don't remember. You learn how to become an interviewer and how to become a conversationalist, and what questions never to ask, like what are your influences. You just don't ask that. You just don't ask that question.
No.
Well, because the answer's too long and too vague. Because
And
the
also
trick
no one wants
is
to
you've often
share
only
it.
got 4 minutes, haven't you, to
Totally.
get some
And
kind of reaction. So
and I
what's
needed
your
sound bites.
approach to that?
I couldn't. I have to remember now, but I needed to get sound bites because it was for radio.
Yeah, sure.
So that was difficult. And I remember interviewing Primal Scream. There's 4
Good
of them.
luck
They're
with
all
that.
sitting back from the microphone with their accents, because you can imagine.
You see,
yeah.
That's the thing that fascinates me is that you've got a terrific kind of what I can only describe as very American energy. And people talk about energy all the time nowadays. They never used to, but it's always there. And whereas bands, particularly bands, not individuals, bands, they lean back, don't they? And their response to pressure is to kind of go into themselves slightly.
Totally.
And you have to make them perform, don't
And
you?
they're also very, very nervous about saying anything that doesn't quite accord with the party line for the rest of the group. So they're very restricted by being in the presence of the others.
I agree. It's always easier to interview one artist.
Absolutely.
Because I've interviewed Primal Scream a few times. I've interviewed Bobby on his own, which has been brilliant. And then with the whole band, he's trying to be gracious to let other people speak. But the first interview with Screamadelica, when it came out, there's a mic. They're not in the studio where I can set up mic stands and get all the mics set up for each individual. So there's one little microphone. They're all sitting back. They're all on, different planet, and they have these thick accents, of course. So that was difficult. And then I had people like Joey Ramone. I went to his house. I went to his apartment, and it was magical. I interviewed him, and then I had to I was doing all of the engineering, and everything was on tape. So everything was with razor blade. So I had to take out about 50, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At the end of everyone. But I think I became good. I remember Brian Eno saying to me, send me a cassette of this interview. I've said things I've never said. And I was such a massive fan of him. And so intimidated, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
I never sent it. I never thought it was good enough. So I just need to listen to it because it's on. These are all on DAT, so I don't have a DAT.
I still want to know the questions that never fail. Can you think of it?
Questions that never fail. The questions I can't remember.
Unless they don't come to mind.
I'm not going to share them with you, Mark.
Trade secrets.
If I can remember what they are,
yeah.
I just can't. I mean, I studied these albums. Of course, there's no Wikipedia.
Recurring Dream. Who would you most like next to you on a long haul flight?
I always kept it on music.
Yeah.
That was one thing they always said to me. Are you a musician? Because I always kept it on music.
Yeah.
And that was one thing I always did. And I still do.
Right.
Fair enough.
I keep it on music unless they want to go elsewhere. But I don't like to get into the gossip and stuff. If they start to bring something up,
Yeah.
we can go there.
Which
but
they very
otherwise I
often
don't.
do.
Sometimes they do.
Usually I find
they do.
whatever the PR tells you not to mention, that's the thing you should mention. Because
But
that's the thing they're going to talk about.
But there's occasionally a double bluff there that the PR knows that by telling you not to mention it, you will, and they want you to. So it's very hard to know whether you're doing the right thing.
That's true. I mean, I got to meet a lot of people and a lot of different artists, and it was so eye-opening, and all different types of music from hip hop as well as I was interviewing Gangstar Guru, all these types of bands, artists, and
most charismatic person you ever interviewed.
Oh, okay. Some of the funniest, the two funniest interviews was the Meat Puppets and definitely Paul Leary from the Butthole Surfers. I mean, I was just on the floor. It wasn't Gibby Haynes.
Yeah.
But Paul Leary, oh my gosh. I was crying laughing, just absolutely crying laughing. And the Meat Puppets as well, just so frigging funny. But I had so many great interviews. I really, Noel Gallagher was a really interesting guy.
He's a fantastic interview.
Fantastic interview. A real
so knowledgeable about music.
So knowledgeable.
And so honest about where he steals things from.
Exactly.
He says, this is that song. I stole that chord sequence.
Yeah.
Sue me.
Yeah. But he, if you have the same interest, I mean, of course I'm a Beatles fan. I mean, he was such a interesting person and a real gentleman as well. But some of them were, the only one I was ever stood up for was Bootsy Collins. Never came down from his hotel room, if he was even there.
If he was there.
Yeah.
And there was only one interview that I walked out of, which was Cop Shoot Cop.
Go on.
Cop Shoot Cop.
Cop Shoot Cop, a New York kind of noise band. But they were getting
what could possibly go wrong with them? Go on.
They were just being kind of like, they were acting like they were 15. And I just got to the point and I couldn't get an answer out of them they're just like, oh, just like being stupid. I said, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Just packed up and they couldn't believe it.
No,
their PR is calling my boss and he stood by me. He said she's never done that before. So I was just like, I'm just not taking this.
Absolutely. Well, if you've interviewed loads of rock bands, you know what bad treatment is.
Totally,
you know what I mean? Because it's stretched all the time, isn't it? These are not people who behave in particularly decorous fashion. And so if somebody pushes you that far, they've clearly gone too far.
Exactly. And, I didn't think of it at the time because I just didn't think that way. But I look back, were they being that way because I was female? I mean, maybe not. I don't know. But there's a very good chance
probably intimidated.
Yeah,
maybe.
Well, it's boys together, isn't it? It's the kind of, it's the thing I think about all the time when I'm walking down the pavement and I'm walking behind 4 16-year-old boys on the way to school. Is that one of them will always be being pushed into the road by the other three because they sort of think it's amusing.
Funny. Yeah.
And some of them become rock bands, and that behaviour never goes away, does it?
But also, when you get four people in a rock band, kind of, taking the piss out of the person interviewing them, if you took them on their own, they'd just fall apart.
Absolutely,
they've just got. Oh, the reason they're doing it is they've got no confidence at all. They've also got nothing to say, and they're trying to paper over all that, and they've got an attitude. God, I've been in so many interviews like that. But look, what year are we in now? Where have we got to?
Okay, well, that's early 90s. And around that time is when I started to go to my friend David Mancuso's loft parties. And I'd gone out. I was more of a live music person, and seeing live bands. But in the late 80s and early 90s, I had a friend named Adam Goldstone who was taking me out to different parties and different clubs, like early house clubs like Tracks and parties like Payday. And he said, I want to take you to this party. And it was on 3rd Street between Avenues B and C. No one outside. And you just knock on the door, someone lets you in. And it was a converted theater. And so we're in the foyer first, and you pay your $9.99 and get give a tenner and get a penny back. And then we walk into this cavernous room where the floors have been leveled out. It was a former theater with this incredible sound system and a very mystical looking guy behind the turntables, which were very expensive turntables and sound system. It was David. And that was one of the things that was another musical moment that really changed my life. And that's
because why? Because he used to play entire tracks without interruption. Was that what it was? He had some respect for them. He didn't talk over it, did he?
Well, yeah, there's no talking because it was a party, but also he didn't mix. But not that even those things were really on my radar. It was more the music that was played because I also come from a similar, even though he was 24 years older than me, because he was a coming of age in the 60s and that well, I was born in the 60s, but that music I knew really well. Like one of my favorite albums is Astral Weeks. It's one of David's favorite albums as well. And he would play Jimi Hendrix at 11 in the morning, side C of Electric Ladyland, my favorite side. Or and I think there was a certain psychedelic and emotive quality to the music that he was playing. So his early house, which on that sound system really came alive because you could hear it on other sound systems and it sounded quite dead. But also stuff like The Orb. Then all this classic underground disco and funk that I had never heard, like Dexter Wansel, Life on Mars, or Johnny Harris, Odyssey, or just that, or the Clash sometimes too. I hear the Clash. Oh my God, Magnificent Seven Dance, the Magnificent Dance, So there's a lot of different kinds of music being played, but it came from a person. I mean, I had already been to Grateful Dead shows. I had already kind of gone through the similar trips that David had kind of gone through, but 24 years later. And it was a similar headspace, I think. And that's really why I think I got into that music. And there was a guy that was there at the parties named John Hall. And in the 80s, I had worked at a trade magazine called Rockpool, which was owned by Mark Joseph, who started the New Music Seminar. And I was actually volunteering and I was taking the DJ's charts and he was one of the reporting DJs. I bump into him. He remembered me. And I said, "What's this record? What's this record? What's this record? What's this record?" And he was a record dealer. And he also worked at Dance Tracks, which was down the road on 3rd Street. And he said, "Well, why don't I need some help sorting through my records." I had already worked for 2 record shops at this point, Strawberries and also Newbury Comics in Massachusetts. So I knew how to organize records. And so after I was doing the syndicated radio shows and then evenings, I would go 1 or 2 nights a week and organize his records. And it was him and Joe Clausell at Dance Tracks. And he had his records there for some reason. I'd be sorting through and they're playing me records. You need this, you need this, you need this, you need this.
And they are records. They're not CDs.
Yeah, all records. Yeah, we didn't play CDs. I started my collection with dance music in that way. So I was doing all this other stuff in the day, and the evenings was another kind of music, and then going to the Loft, and then other parties like the Shelter, Louis Vega's, Wednesday nights at Sound Factory Bar, Save the Robots, which is an after hours club around the corner from the Loft, completely illegal, where I believe they had a gun check. I don't know if they did, but I heard that they did. So I was going out, Pyramid Club. So I was going, but I was also still seeing a load of live bands. I was going to see Nirvana. I was going to CBGBs. I was going to the Ritz. I was going to Roseland Ballroom. So it was all music and just different types of music as well. And hip hop as well. I was really into hip hop, especially in the early 90s. DJ Red Alert, I listened to his shows and, you could not escape hip hop living in New York in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, it was golden age, so this was all around me. It was amazing.
Have you got any more records and odds and ends to show us?
Well, I found some of my early high school mixtapes, which I wrote what was on there.
All right.
So this is quite fun. This one, Blast Off by the Birthday Party, Tumble and Fall, Zymox, and we were talking about Ultravox before, Saturday Night in the City of the Dead, but that was premature, wasn't it? Ultravox, Interzone, Joy Division, Spinning Rounds, Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry, She Said, The Cramps, Playground Twist, Susie and the Banshees, The Walk, The Cure, Run, Iggy Pop, Run Like a Villain, Richie Sakamoto, New Order, Procession, Top Third Floor Elevators. Third Floor for me. Oh, that's the Outlets. That would have been a garage band. Probably talking about 13th Floor Elevators, maybe. I don't know. Looking Daggers, Eyeless and Gaza. Remember them?
I
Red
do.
Sails,
Certainly
David
do.
Bowie.
Yeah.
Resistance, The Lucy Show, Just Like Honey, Jesus and Mary Chain, Walk Into the Sun, The March Violets. Again, that was another one of those
Wonderful.
Paisley bands. Sleepless,
That's good.
King Crimson. Number
King
13.
Crimson.
Yeah, number 13, The Cult, Killing Joke, Frenzy, Nina Hagen, Cosmo Shiva, Femme Fatale, VU, and Nico. I was a massive Velvet Underground fan. In fact, I pulled this out because this was interesting because I was going to record fairs. And, since it was early 80s, the Velvet Underground was still quite underground. I found the original $12. $12 for an original Andy Warhol. I mean, half the banana stickers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
12 bucks. Couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this kind of gives you an idea of what I was listening to. Bowie, Let's Spend the Night Together, Stones, Fortune Teller by the Stones. Interesting. Painted Black, Avengers. Like that's my little Stones.
Lovely mixes.
That's my little Stones one there.
Great to have King Crimson on the same.
So those records behind you.
Yeah.
Where do they come from?
Well,
They come from the States. You bring them with you, or have you accumulated them, or what?
I've culled my collection over the years, especially living in New York. I lived in small flats.
Yeah, you got no room.
And I moved all the time because the rents were always going up.
Yeah.
And then I also moved over here, so I culled it again. And then I've culled it. I mean, probably the last one was when we did the room over. So 2 years ago. So I have just under 10,000, but it would have been about 20,000 if I had not gotten rid of anything.
Right.
But it's there's things I got rid of that I'm unhappy about, but then there's things like this. I remember buying this with my mom at Leech.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Pistols,
Okay.
never mind. I mean, I have a lot of those original things. About this, I think I took from my aunt's. The only record from my aunt that I didn't give back. No one knew about
Lionheart.
and that was
great
before.
record.
That was before Hounds of Love. So Hounds of
it's
Love,
a great
of course,
record.
was
How do you keep them? Are they alphabetical?
it's all different. So albums in general, I have to do it based around what I do. And so albums are alphabetized, but then because I'm a DJ, there's dance music and stuff that I would play out that's organized differently. So whether it's like, African music might be in a certain section, Latin, Brazilian, disco, house, broken beat, they will all kind of be separate because sometimes it depends on the gig that I'm doing and how I'm going to tailor my sound to what I'm into, what works better. Is it more of a jazzy thing? Is it more of a disco thing? Is it more of a house thing? Techno? So those things are more divided up sometimes, and it's just how I think. It might be the producer, it could be the label. So only I know my way around this, really.
I bet.
But albums in general, I didn't, I kept jazz, soul, rock, pop all together, just alphabetized.
Right.
So the Classic Album Sundays format that you kind of founded, partly, as far as I can see, just the idea of listening to a whole record in its entirety, out of respect to the idea that it's not being broken down digitally and tracks rearranged in different orders and things like that. Of all the events that you had, and you've done loads of those records, which are the ones do you think were the most successful, that you learnt the most about, or had different feelings about the record after discussing it and listening to it?
It's always with the artist. The ones, we started this as an album club without an artist. I would just tell the story behind it. And the Word magazine famously covered.
We did a thing about you in 2010, I think. Was it? Oh, good.
The first one, and it was Kate Mossman.
That's right.
All right.
A wonderful feature. Our record clubs, the new book clubs. And the BBC saw that. And that's when they came down and filmed.
So we made you.
We made you. We did. We put you on the map.
So I said that feature. How long ago was that feature?
2010.
2010.
I remember it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Out in November. BBC called me in December, and they.
So what record were you listening to when
she went to an event?
Abbey
It was in
Road.
Abbey Road. It was a pub in
Road.
North London somewhere, and she said everyone sat in complete silence and listened to Abbey Road, and then discussed it before and after. She said it was fantastic.
Yeah, and then David Solito came to BBC Arts Editor, came to the Bowie one. Ziggy Stardust, and also I was playing music, and the startup, when people are kind of eating and just talking and eating pizza, I'd play about an hour and a half of music that's somehow related, whether it's contemporary albums. So even with Ziggy, I was playing obviously Roxy, but even Soft Machine, like Soft Machine from that era. And I remember David Slitta saying, "Oh, this is Soft Machine." Oh my God, Soft Machine. But also Bowie's earlier work, things that would have influenced him, obviously, all sorts of stuff. But so just to give a kind of musical context. And then I'd tell the story. Then then phones off, no talking, album plays loud on a audiophile hi-fi, so you can hear it in a different, with more detail.
Yeah.
Especially when you're not talking and you're just listening, and then with the system, it gives you more details. You can even get deeper into it. And then sharing that experience, just like I did in my bedroom with, around the turntable with friends of mine, listening to records, and then discuss it at the end. But in terms, I remember hearing Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures for the first time in a great sound system, because of course I'd grown up listening to it on my crappy hi-fi in my house and in my bedroom, my all-in-one kind of thing. And then really appreciating Martin Hannett's production and going, oh my God. I've always loved the songs and the music, don't get me wrong, but when you could get deeper into the production, I could hear things I hadn't heard before, and I really appreciated him. When I first heard Unknown Pleasures, I couldn't believe it. It was like or hearing Massive Attack Mezzanine for the first time. I had done the marketing for that album in the States, and so I knew it really well. But when I listened to it on an audiophile system, especially the original pressing, oh my gosh, it's just unreal. But in terms of learning more about the albums, it's more about interviewing the artists. I got to interview Nick Mason about both Saucerful of Secrets and Dark Side of the Moon, and you just get deeper into it. Talking to Jarvis about Pulp, different class, talking to Jazzy B about Soul to Soul Club Classics Volume 1 and the whole sound system scene in North London. There's so many people I could talk about. I've been quite fortunate to have interviewed so many of these artists and producers as well. It's, you just get deeper into it. And I think that's the experience that Classic Album Sundays gives more, and I'll say it, more than other album clubs, is that we go deeper. Both on the deep listening side, because no one does that in the same way. And, this.
But also the part of the appeal, which sadly we can't do now, is that it's people actually listen to records together in a room, because Dave and I are old enough to that's what it was like for us when we were teenagers. You'd get your new copy of Medal, or what it was. We would literally, or I can remember it with things like Blonde on Blonde, particularly. I can remember sitting there, four of us,
albums,
in the kind of almost darkness, and just sitting in absolute silence, reverential silence, just listening to this record, barely speaking in between.
The thing I'd like to add, though, it's funny, we were talking the other day to these two guys who run this, Irish guys who run this really good Beatles podcast, Nothing Is Real. And they're both younger guys, they kind of came to the Beatles later on. And I said, have you ever listened to a Beatles record, a Beatles mono 45 from 1965, on a Dansette record player? Because that's, and this applies to absolutely everything at every stage in music. Have you heard it in the technology on which people heard it at the time? Because actually that sort of counts in a big way, doesn't it? You know what I mean? And so the early 80s, it was a Walkman, wasn't it, with the little spongy headphones and so forth. And the later,
I'll tell you a good example of this. John Savage, who you'll know, I'm sure, Colleen, the right John Savage.
Lovely.
John Savage put out a series of CDs which were digitized versions of 45, scratchy old analog 45s playing, but you just got them as tracks on a CD. So you got them playing as they would do on a Dansette, and the difference was amazing, actually.
It
is.
is.
They were so thrilling and so kind of trebly and toppy and kind of energizing.
It's also very
tingling
it's very compressed
sound
as well. Yeah.
It's
a whole different sound to an LP. Now that I'm an audiophile, I can't say sonically I appreciate 7 inches anymore, except for the more novelty and kind of the memories that it conjures, the nostalgia, rather
Yeah.
than the actual sound. The
Yeah,
actual
yeah.
sound, when I compare it, I'm like, it's not as open. It's not as open, and it doesn't have as much of a sound stage, as we say in audiophile world.
Oh,
But,
really? Oh, never heard
it
that one
doesn't.
before.
Oh, you haven't?
Oh,
Sound
good
Welcome
stage.
to my
I've learned
world.
something.
In that
That's
Welcome
good.
to my world.
That's good. Wonderful.
But then you hear so many albums that you loved, and you hear it in a whole new way. And then, of course, there's lots of record labels like Mobile Fidelity and what's the one I'm thinking? Analog Productions, that they repress one of your favorite albums, double 45, and it sings.
Yeah.
It really sings, whether it's Jeff Buckley, Grace, or Dylan. I have a bunch of Dylan with Blood on the Tracks, and so there's so many. Doors, even I got all the they sent me the Doors catalog, and sounded a lot different than my greatest hits, the Doors, on my crappy hi-fi. Still love that. I'm not saying it's worse or better. I'm just saying it's different. It is, and it just opens up like, oh, this is what the artist was hearing.
Yeah.
This is what they were hearing in the studio, because actually the technology in the 50s and 60s was wonderful.
So Classic Album Sundays will go back to being a live event again soon.
Yeah, it will, but I'm going to keep,
because you've been doing them online. You've been
interviewing.
interviewing. I saw you, Laurie
both.
Anderson. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to keep both. So keep the digital offerings going.
Yeah.
Because it's been interesting, because the album club is worldwide. So there's people in Australia getting up on a Monday
morning, lovely.
And there's people in Washington, D.C. and the East Coast, and sometimes even the West Coast of the States. So there's been and we've been doing the pub quiz, and I've gotten to know people. And the pub quizzes has been really fun.
Yeah.
So I write them in 2 themed parts. So it's like
so what you find, the great truth of digital, of anything, is you can fill your entire day with doing things, can't you? It just never stops. There's always just a tiny little thing and another tiny little thing. It's not like going somewhere and doing something and then coming home, is it?
The commute's been very easy, and I have had a lot of work, and it did get to a point where I realized I've done between 140 and 150 radio shows, live streams, interviews, DJ mixes, and Classic Album Sundays events in 1 year.
Yeah,
that's astonishing.
And almost all of it, about 90% of that, was on camera.
Yeah.
And it was. Then I said, I need a break.
Well, to be fair, in our defense, I think we've done about 140 every day, I think, something like that, isn't it? So that's just one every other day. It builds up. Exactly.
It's what you do. But you also feel fortunate saying, this is what I love. And I might not be getting paid for a lot of it, but I still love it anyways. I mean,
Absolutely.
I worked in a record shop for $2.35 an hour, while all my other friends were making a lot more money, So you realize, wow, I do this because I love it. And it's what I do, and I would do it anyways. So it was kind of a nice realization about that as well.
So having done all your Classic Album Sundays, you should be in a better position than most of us to tell us what is the greatest record ever made.
Okay, that was so hard, because I like how you phrased it, the greatest record ever made. It actually made it easier, because if you said, what's your favorite record?
Oh, okay.
That's
whichever.
Different. That's different.
Whichever, okay.
That could
be
the Butthole Surfers. Yeah.
It could be Locust Abortion Technician. It could be What's Going On. It could be a lot of different things. But when you said the greatest record ever,
all right,
it still is one of my top 10, which is ever shifting. But I still think it is the greatest album ever made, because of its universal appeal. And also, let me just, because it was masterminded by one person, but has the best range of guest artists, and that's
all right.
Oh, what a great choice! Yeah,
well, there's been chosen before. Yeah.
Songs in the Key of Life. I mean, this is it is the greatest album ever made. I mean, I was thinking of Astral Weeks, but Astral Weeks doesn't have the same universal appeal. It's one of those albums that, if you're obsessed with it like I am, you love it more every time you hear it. for a lot of people, they just don't get Astral Weeks.
No, I'm sure.
Everybody gets this album.
No,
Yeah,
that's
also
right.
Astral Weeks only has one kind of tone to it, whereas that is a kind of it's dance music and it's kind
And
of
everybody
ballads and
knows
it's
it.
reflective and everybody knows it.
Everybody knows
It raises the sum of human happiness.
Now,
does.
has your copy still got the little single inside?
There it is.
There
Oh,
it is.
that's great.
I got the.
wonder if
of course, I have 2 copies of this. I have
Oh.
I have multiple copies of most of my favorite albums, but yeah,
That's so classic, isn't it? You make a double album, then you go, oh, I'll tell you what, here's another
I have
3.
more
One
to
more
give.
song I'd like to
Here's
get
another
on.
song. And like, all the albums around it are amazing albums. I mean, what
Yeah.
a run of Stevie
Yeah.
Wonder's classic
Oh, yeah,
period.
yeah.
I mean, it's
Have you ever heard any of those
unreal.
separations you can get on the internet now of him playing all the different synthesizer parts? Have you seen that? Heard those breakdowns? Oh, it's astonishing. The amount
Oh.
of detail, the skill, and I just they're beautifully made records.
I mean,
They're
and
fantastic.
think about the other things he was doing. Like yesterday on my radio show, I played Ramsey Lewis' Spring High. Stevie's on it. Stevie wrote it. Stevie's playing keys.
Yeah,
on it
yeah.
too. It's like, where, how do these people have all that energy?
Well, he
to
didn't
be
go home, did
everywhere?
he? Because he goes in the studio in 1971 and gets introduced to the Moog synthesizer. The Tonto thing, all
Oh
that.
yeah,
And he basically doesn't go home for years.
yeah.
He just sits there all day long playing, and everything's
Was
recorded.
it Malcolm Cecil, wasn't it?
Yeah, because
He
one
was
of them died, didn't it? Margaret
Yeah.
died. Was it Margaret died the other
I can't
day?
remember.
Yes.
And they were the people who
Tonto's
just
expanding headband.
yeah
Some good stuff.
they had the
That's right. It was the guy. That's the guy. Exactly.
People, yeah, and they made that big synthesizer.
Oh, what
that
was his name?
filled a room.
Clive somebody. Yes, that's right. He died very recently, and he set up all that synthesizer technology
Yeah,
with
and
Stevie
it's
Wonder.
interesting because it was Stevie really and Herbie Hancock that were really heavily getting into synths very
Yeah,
early in
yeah.
the 1970s. And they're not always. People don't always recognize them as being real, kind of technological innovators. And
No,
they,
no.
and they
Yeah.
were. They
Oh,
really were.
definitely.
Well, look, that's been an absolute roller coaster. What a great life! Fantastic. Twinge of envy from both
What
of
a
us.
great room.
What a great room too. Yeah, even more
Thank
envy.
you.
Thanks so much, Colin. We really enjoyed it. Thanks for doing it.
Well, that was a real pleasure.
and we'll
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.